The rain battered the windows of my San Francisco loft, a relentless drumbeat that mirrored the chaos in my chest. I stood frozen, staring at the text from my sister. Evan's coming to stay. He's got nowhere else to go. My straight brother-in-law, Evan, the man who'd always been a walking contradiction, charming, infuriating, untouchable, was about to crash into my carefully ordered life. I'd known Evan for 6 years, ever since my sister Clara married him in a whirlwind Napa Valley wedding. He was the kind of guy who filled a room with his presence. Broad shoulders, a crooked smile that could disarm anyone, and a laugh that rumbled like distant thunder. At 34, he was a contractor who built homes with his hands, his calloused fingers a testament to his trade. Me? I'm Julian, 32, a graphic designer who'd rather sketch a skyline than swing a hammer. I'm also gay, out since I was 19, and I'd spent years dodging the spark in my gut every time Evan clapped me on the shoulder or lingered too long in a glance. That night, as the city lights blurred through the rain-streaked glass, the buzzer sounded. I opened the door to find Evan, soaked to the bone, his leather jacket clinging to his frame. "Jules, man, I owe you one," he said, his voice rough but warm, like whiskey on a cold night. He dragged a duffel bag inside, his boots leaving wet prints on my hardwood floor. Clara had kicked him out after a fight, something about him working too much or maybe not enough. She hadn't been clear and I didn't press. All I knew was that Evan needed a couch and I had one. The loft was small, a one-bedroom with exposed brick walls and a view of the Bay Bridge that made the rent worth it. I gestured to the couch, a worn gray thing I'd found at a thrift store. "It's not much, but it's yours for as long as you need." Evan nodded, dropping his bag and running a hand through his damp hair. His eyes caught mine, and for a split second, I swore I saw something flicker, something that wasn't just gratitude. "Thanks, man," he said, peeling off his jacket. "Didn't expect to be crashing with my brother-in-law like some college kid." He laughed, but it was hollow, and I could see the weight he was carrying. I offered him a beer, and we sat at my tiny kitchen counter, the city humming outside. He talked about the fight with Clara, vague details about missed anniversaries and late nights at work. I listened, trying not to notice the way his fingers gripped the bottle or how his knee brushed mine under the counter. "You ever feel like you're running in place?" he asked suddenly, his blue eyes searching mine. I froze, the question cutting deeper than he could have known. I'd spent years running from the way I felt about him, burying it under polite smiles and family dinners. "Yeah," I said quietly, "all the time." That first night, Evan slept on the couch, his long frame barely fitting. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound of his steady breathing filtering through the thin walls. I told myself this was temporary. He'd patch things up with Clara, move out, and I'd go back to my quiet life. But as the days turned into a week, something shifted. Evan didn't just need a couch. He needed someone to see him, really see him, and somehow that someone was me. We fell into a rhythm, sharing coffee in the mornings, trading stories about our wildly different lives. He'd tease me about my fancy art degree. I'd rib him about his toolbox looking like it belonged in a museum. But there were moments, quiet ones, when he'd linger in the kitchen while I sketched, or when he'd ask about my life in a way that felt too personal, too raw. One night, after too many beers, he leaned against the counter, closer than he needed to be, and said, "You're not like anyone I've ever met, Jules." My heart stuttered. I wanted to laugh it off, to pretend I didn't feel the air thicken between us. But his eyes held mine, and I couldn't look away. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing my arm, and the world tilted. For a moment, we were just two people, not brother-in-law and brother-in-law, not straight and gay. Just two souls caught in a storm neither of us had seen coming. The next morning, The loft felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. Evan was up before me, brewing coffee in my tiny kitchen, his broad back turned as he fumbled with my ancient coffee maker. I stood in the doorway, watching the way his t-shirt stretched across his shoulders, and tried to shake off the memory of his hand on my arm. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a moment. Just a mistake. But Evan didn't act like it was a mistake. He turned, handing me a mug with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You sleep like shit, don't you?" he said, nodding toward the dark circles under my eyes. I muttered something about deadlines, but the truth was I'd spent the night replaying that moment, dissecting every glance, every word. I was 32, not some lovesick teenager. Yet here I was, unraveling over my sister's husband. The day passed in a blur of normalcy. I worked on a logo for a client. Evan headed out to a job site, his tool belt slung low on his hips. But when he came back that evening, covered in sawdust and smelling faintly of cedar, he didn't head straight for the couch. Instead, he lingered, asking if I wanted to grab takeout. We ended up with Thai food, sprawled on the floor like kids, passing containers back and forth. The city lights glittered outside, and for a while, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. "Clara called today," he said suddenly, his voice low. My stomach twisted, but I nodded, waiting. "She wants me to come back. Says we can work it out." He didn't look at me, just stared at the pad thai in his hands. "What do you think I should do?" I wanted to scream, stay. I wanted to tell him that the past week had cracked open something in me I'd spent years trying to bury. But he was straight, married, my sister's husband. So I said, "You love her, don't you? Maybe you should try." The words tasted like ash. Evan didn't answer right away. He set the container down, his fingers brushing mine as he reached for his beer. "What if I don't know what I want anymore?" he asked, his voice barely audible. My heart slammed against my ribs. I opened my mouth to respond, but my phone buzzed. Clara. I ignored it, but the moment was gone, and Evan retreated to the couch. The next few days were torture. Evan was still there, still too close, his presence filling every corner of the loft. We didn't talk about that night, but the tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with every shared glance. One evening, I came home to find him sketching something on a napkin, a rough outline of a house, all sharp angles and big windows. "This is what I'd build if I could start over," he said, sliding it toward me. "What do you think?" I studied the sketch, my fingers tracing the lines he'd drawn. "It's beautiful," I said, and I meant it, but I wasn't just talking about the house. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something unguarded in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or hope. "Jules," he started. But the buzzer rang, shattering the moment. It was a delivery guy with the wrong address, but it was enough to pull us back to reality. That night, I couldn't sleep. I heard Evan moving around in the living room, the creak of the couch as he shifted. I imagined him lying there, staring at the ceiling like I was, both of us caught in this impossible space between what was and what could be. I wanted to go to him to ask what he'd meant, but fear kept me rooted to my bed. The next morning, he was gone when I woke up. A note on the counter read, "Went to see Clara. Back later." My heart sank, but I told myself it was for the best. He'd go back to her, and I'd move on. But when the door opened that evening and Evan walked in, his face drawn and his bag still slung over his shoulder, I knew nothing was resolved. "She wants me to be someone I'm not," he said, his voice breaking, "and I don't think I can do that anymore." He stepped closer, and I felt the air shift again, charged with something neither of us could name. "Evan?" I whispered, but he was already reaching for me, his hand cupping my face. The world stopped, and for one impossible moment, it was just us, no labels, no rules, just the truth of what we felt. His lips were on mine before I could process it, rough and urgent, like he'd been holding back for years. My hands found his chest, fingers curling into his shirt as the world spun out of focus. This was Evan, straight, married Evan, kissing me in my own kitchen, and it was everything I'd never let myself want. We broke apart, breathless, his forehead pressed against mine. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but his hands didn't let go, still gripping my waist. "I don't know what I'm doing, Jules, but I can't stop feeling this." His voice cracked, and I saw the man beneath the bravado, a man unraveling just like me. I wanted to ask a million questions, but all I could manage was, "Are you sure?" He nodded, his eyes searching mine for something I wasn't sure I could give. We stumbled to the couch, not because it was romantic, but because it was close, and sat there, tangled in each other, trying to make sense of what was happening. The city hummed outside, indifferent to the chaos in my loft. For the next few days, we lived in a fragile bubble. Evan didn't go back to Clara, and I didn't ask why. We cooked dinner together, watched old movies, and stole kisses when the weight of reality felt too heavy. But every touch, every glance, carried a question. What are we doing? I was gay, out, and proud, but Evan was a man who'd never questioned his identity until now. The guilt gnawed at me. Clara was my sister, and I was falling for her husband. One night, we walked along the Embarcadero, the bay glittering under the moonlight. Evan stopped, leaning against the railing, his breath visible in the chilly air. "I've never felt like this," he admitted, his voice low. "Not with Clara, not with anyone. But I'm scared, Jules. What does this make me?" I wanted to tell him it didn't matter, that labels were just words. But I knew it wasn't that simple. "It makes you human," I said finally. "It means you're figuring it out, just like I did." He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, and for a moment, the world felt right. But reality crashed in the next morning. Clara showed up at the loft, her eyes red from crying. "Evan, we need to talk," she said, barely glancing at me. My heart sank as I watched them step outside, their voices muffled but sharp. I paced the loft, my sketches scattered on the table, a half-finished portrait of Evan staring back at me. When he came back, his face was pale. "She knows," he said simply. "Not everything, but enough." I felt like I'd been punched. "What did you tell her?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I told her I'm not going back," he said, his jaw tight. "But I didn't tell her about us. Not yet." The not yet hung between us, a promise and a threat. I wanted to be angry, to demand answers, but all I could see was the pain in his eyes. He was trying to rewrite his entire life, and I was the catalyst. That night, we didn't kiss. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the silence heavy. "I don't want to hurt her," he said finally. "But I don't want to lose you either." I didn't know how to respond, so I just reached for his hand, holding on like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The next day, Evan got a call from a client in Oakland, a big job that could keep him busy for weeks. He left early, promising to be back by dinner. I spent the day sketching, trying to pour my confusion into lines and shapes. But when he walked through the door that evening, his eyes were distant, and I knew something had shifted. "I saw Clara today," he said, his voice flat. "She wants to try counseling, says it could fix us." My heart stopped. "And what do you want?" I asked, barely breathing. He looked at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't name. "I want to be honest," he said. "With her, with you, with myself. But I don't know how." He stepped closer, and I felt the pull again, the undeniable gravity of him. But this time, I didn't let myself fall. Not yet. The loft felt like a battlefield, every corner charged with the weight of unspoken words. Evan and I danced around each other for days, caught between desire and doubt. He was still sleeping on the couch, but the distance between us felt like a chasm. I wanted to bridge it, to pull him close and forget the world outside, but Clara's shadow loomed over us. One evening, Evan came home late, his face etched with exhaustion. "I told her," he said, dropping his keys on the counter. "About us." My heart lurched, a mix of relief and dread. "She didn't take it well," he added, his voice barely above a whisper. "She thinks I'm confused, that you're I don't know, manipulating me." The words stung, but I couldn't blame her. Clara was my sister, my fierce, loyal sister who'd always been there for me. Now I was the one tearing her world apart. "What did you say?" I asked, my throat tight. "I told her I'm not confused," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "I told her I'm in love with you." The world stopped. I'd spent years guarding my heart, convincing myself Evan was off limits. And now he was standing here, laying it all bare. I wanted to kiss him, to tell him I felt the same, but the weight of his words, of what they meant for Clara, for us, held me back. "Evan, it's not simple," I said, my voice shaking. "You're married. She's my sister. What are we supposed to do?" He stepped closer, his hand reaching for mine, but I pulled back. "I need time," I said, hating myself for it. He nodded, his jaw tight, and retreated to the couch. That night, I lay awake, torn between love and guilt. I thought of Clara, her laughter, her trust. I thought of Evan, his touch, his confession. I didn't know how to choose or if I even had the right to. The next morning, I found Evan sketching again. Another house, this one softer, with curved lines and a garden. "This is for us," he said quietly, sliding it toward me. "If we get through this." My heart ached, but I couldn't meet his eyes. "I don't know if we can," I admitted. He left for work, and I called Clara. Her voice was sharp, brittle like glass about to shatter. "How could you, Julian?" she asked. "He's my husband." I tried to explain, to tell her I hadn't meant for this to happen, but she hung up before I could finish. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling like I'd lost them both. When Evan came home, I was waiting. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "This isn't fair to Clara, or to us." He looked at me, his eyes pleading, but I pressed on. "You need to figure out what you want, Evan. Not just for me, but for yourself." He didn't argue. He packed his bag, his movements slow, deliberate. "I'm not giving up on us," he said as he stood in the doorway. "But I'll give you space." The door closed behind him, and the loft felt emptier than it ever had. Days turned into weeks. I threw myself into work, sketching until my hands ached, trying to fill the void Evan had left. Clara wouldn't answer my calls, and Evan's texts were short, polite, distant. I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if I'd pushed away the one person who'd seen me, really seen me. Then, one rainy evening, the buzzer sounded. I opened the door to find Evan, soaked again, his eyes bright with something I hadn't seen before. "I filed for divorce," he said, his voice steady. "I told Clara everything. I'm done hiding, Jules. I want you. I want us." My heart pounded as I stepped aside, letting him in. The rain roared outside, but in that moment, it was just us, standing on the edge of something new, something terrifying, something real. The loft was alive again, filled with the sound of Evan's laughter, the clink of coffee mugs, the soft rustle of his sketches. He didn't go back to the couch that night or any night after. My bed became ours, a sanctuary where we could be ourselves. No labels, no shame. But the world outside wasn't as forgiving. Clara's silence was deafening. I wrote her letters, long ones, pouring out my heart, but they went unanswered. I didn't blame her. I'd fallen for her husband, and no amount of apology could erase that. Still, I held on to hope that one day she'd understand, that she'd see I hadn't chosen this to hurt her. Evan was different now, lighter, like a weight had been lifted. He talked about his past, about the expectations he'd carried as a straight man, about the fear that had kept him from questioning who he was. "You changed everything," he told me one night, his head resting on my chest. "You made me brave." I kissed his forehead, my heart swelling, but the guilt lingered, a quiet ache I couldn't shake. We built a life together piece by piece. Evan took on smaller jobs, spending more time in the loft, sketching houses we dreamed of building someday. I designed a logo for his contracting business, a simple, elegant thing that made him grin like a kid. We walked the city together, hand in hand, ignoring the occasional stares. San Francisco was kind, but not everyone was. One evening, we ran into Clara at a cafe in the Mission. She was with a friend, her face pale when she saw us. I braced for anger, but she just looked at Evan, then at me and said, "I hope you're happy." Her voice was cold, but there was a crack in it, a hint of something softer. She walked away before I could respond, but Evan squeezed my hand, grounding me. Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. Evan moved in officially, his toolbox tucked under my desk, his sketches pinned to the walls. We fought sometimes, about money, about the future, about the mess we'd made, but we always came back to each other. One night, he pulled me close and whispered, "I'd choose you 1,000 times over Jules." I believed him. The next spring, we drove to Napa Valley, where it had all started. Not for a wedding, but for us. We stood in a vineyard, the sun setting behind us, and made promises. Not with rings, but with words, with trust. I thought of Clara, of the family I'd lost, and I hoped she'd find her own peace someday. Back in the loft, I found one of Evan's sketches on the table, a house with a garden, the one he'd drawn for us. Tucked beside it was a note in his messy handwriting. "We're building this. Together." I smiled, tears stinging my eyes, and knew we'd already started. Our love wasn't perfect. It was messy, complicated, born from chaos and choice. But it was ours, and it was enough. We'd found each other in the wreckage, two souls who dared to rewrite their stories, and that was the most human thing of all.